All right. Welcome to another episode of the Credder Podcast. I'm your host, Chase Palmieri, and with me today is Luke Mulks. Luke is the Vice President of Business Operations at Brave. And Brave, for those of you who don't know, was launched in 2015 and is a free and open source web browser that automatically blocks ads and website trackers and provides a way for content creators to earn cryptocurrency rewards called basic attention tokens for the amount of time and, yeah, you guessed it, the attention that Brave users spend on your website. Luke, thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So before we dive into all the innovation happening at Brave, I want to go a little bit into your advertising background. So you were deep in the advertising world before joining Brave. Can you talk to us just a little bit about what kind of work you were doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of started off in publishing, and then I started doing startups. And so that was kind of my first kind of foray into digital advertising, was figuring out how to draw people into those startups. But then I started with a company called OAO in 2011, right when programmatic advertising was starting to kind of pick up. And OAO is a small company. We were about 50 people, but we were networked into everything, right? Like, so I worked with NBC Universal, Comcast, worked with the NFL, Major League Soccer, a lot of these big media companies, NBC, Universal, like a lot of them. Anyway, so we kind of sat between the publisher, the media company, and the ad stack. And so we had to kind of we worked with like Freewheel, with Google, we were reseller of both. We worked with, did level 1, level 2 support, and basically hooked together ad product integrations and handed those off to operational teams to do day-to-day campaign stuff. So you could see us as kind of like having to have the whole Swiss Army knife of ad products, and then like knowing how all the pieces fit together, getting them operational, and doing that. So I was in a really interesting position because our vantage point was we saw everything. We saw the whole Lumascape basically. And not only did we see it, but we had to get it all to work. And so you know where the bugs are, you know what everybody really wants. And then, after a while, everybody's got their own little personal checklist of what they're comfortable with their life. And I hit a point where the data collection was so massive and really kind of sticking to everything. And also people weren't aware of it either. I mean, I started working with Brave in 2016. I started like consulting with them in March of 2016, and then came on later that year. So that was before GDPR. That was before, a lot of this awareness that's starting to kind of come to the surface about privacy. So yeah, that's my kind of background. I came into Brave and helped them out initially, trying to kind of get around some of these services that were going after ad blocking users, because Brave in the beginning was just basically blocking ads and working on proof of concept. So yeah, like then it developed into kind of making business models work with this new system, et cetera.
Yeah, and when you were deep in this online advertising world and working with all of these partners, was there any talk or awareness amongst those players that their model, because of the kind of data privacy breach, was kind of doomed to be innovated against in the future at some point?
I don't think so. At the time, like it never really came up in meetings, and we were in meetings with everybody, right? So it was not on the forefront. It was very much a time. I mean, I think even now, you see kind of this dance and show going on with the media and with the news press around privacy and all these companies talking about privacy, but still, it's very much still day-to-day status quo. I mean, there's a few more check boxes and things like that, but yeah, at the time, no, it was. In fact, it was very much, incentives were very much aligned in the opposite direction. Like it was, the ironic thing was Snowden came out with the revelations in like 2011ish, and then that as soon as that happened, you saw this kind of upstart of all these data warehouses and business intelligence and all of that stuff. So instead of having kind of these few big tech companies, then every media company started to kind of become their own intelligence wing. And so that all kind of happened after the fact. So that's where it was kind of getting disturbing, because you see, the amount of data flowing through and just the persistence of it all, right? Like, and the fact that it was heavily incentivized to do so.
Right. And one thing that we're going to touch a lot on today is kind of the innovation that Brave is doing in the space of online advertising. But before we get into that, I think it's worth maybe taking advertising out of the hot seat for a second and recognizing it for what it has done for society, because in many ways, advertising was itself a really big innovation because it has created a world where certain products, services, and experiences can actually be free for consumers. So if before we kind of beat on advertising and all the kind of broken incentive models behind it, can you speak to kind of the power that advertising unlocks and maybe how it has been good for society in certain ways?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, there's most small businesses around online today would not be around without advertising. And because whether you're allowing advertising in your domain or using it to promote your business, right? Like it is a extremely powerful tool. And I think Brave has been very clear from the beginning, we're not anti-advertising. It's just, there's just this need to address the fundamental problems with the existing model of monetizing on the internet, and just even at the base level of just letting people know like what's really going on, right? Like and so that's one of the reasons why we did bring an ad platform, and that's been kind of the plan from day one. Is like just a better deal, right? A better deal for everybody and a safer web, one where you can browse with agency, privacy, and all of that.
Right. Okay. So now let's get into what Brave is doing on the browser level. So why don't you give me kind of the basic 2-sentence value proposition or pitch for why people should switch to what I think most people are on is Chrome, Safari, Firefox, why they should make the switch to Brave.
Yeah, so Brave has kind of like instilled these principles of having privacy by default. So anything third-party tracker, ad call, anything like that that would collect your data without you being aware of it is blocked by Brave by default. So you start with that level. You get, because you're blocking all those consuming scripts and all those things that are happening in the background, we end up with a browser that's up 3 times faster than the competition. So you get faster down page loading speeds, you get lower bandwidth consumption, and you get better battery usage, basically. And then, on top of that, we put this platform with the basic attention token with better advertising model that you actually earn for your attention on. So like it really starts with getting the basics right and then building on top of those. And there is some kind of creative destruction involved in we try to balance that as much as possible, but really you can't have both kind of ideals living together. They don't really coexist very well.
Right. And speaking of creative destruction, Brendan Eich, the founder of Brave, was also the founder of Firefox, which, is one of the other players in what we talk about frequently here as the browser wars. I think the browser level is the most interesting layer of the internet today because of its ability to kind of stop things preventatively, but also to connect people in real time across multiple different services and experiences. I guess let's dive into what you mentioned a moment ago, which is that the browser is able to perform and pull up pages more quickly because it's blocking these advertisements. So can you explain to people who aren't maybe as familiar with how advertisements make their way onto your screen about why blocking them would make the page load more quickly?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something where you can really feel it too, because, like it's 2021 and there are some pages, now it's getting better, but there were some pages where it just seems like they never stop loading, right? Even though you see the content there. So when you go to a website, there are maybe 3 to 5 ad slots on a page where an advertisement sits. But what's really going on in the background when you load that page, maybe let's say you have 1 to 300 calls that go to the server to collect all of the content and all of the resources that are required to load the page. Well, then you have this second set of calls that go out, and there's usually one batch of calls for each of those slots. And then what you see after that are just a ton of other calls that happen because all of these different third parties are bidding on you, on the opportunity to serve an ad to you. And in order for them to bid on that opportunity, they have to have information about you so they know what the value is of the opportunity and they can make their bid for it. And that's basically how programmatic advertising works. And so you have all this data extraction in that bidding process paired with, when there is a winner picked, then you're serving an ad, but that ad also has 3 to 5 different tracking pixels and verification pixels that are tracking, because you're in a scenario where nobody trusts anybody, right? You've got a publisher, and there's publisher fraud. There's other types of advertising fraud that happen. Agencies will want to use their own measurement vendor for tracking, and then a publisher has their own, and there might be 3 to 4 different ones in there. So even when you get past this whole mess of calls to get to the winning ad, then you serve the ad, and that's got other pixels and other trackers that fire off. It's just this really mangled mess of just noise, and all. It's kind of like molasses. It's just, you get in there and it just congests your network up. And so when you block that stuff, what we do is we kind of like take the head off the hydra, right? Like, and the base at the neck level. So you get that first call, and then it saves you from having all of those other subsequent calls taking place. And that's kind of what we do at Brave. And if you cut that early, then all that's loading are the things on the page that actually need to load in order for the content to work. And I think aside from the loading time, what you start to see and what you forget, like, and this was really apparent because we used to test every browser in my previous gig. And at this one, it's like, okay, I'm so used to using Brave that when I go back to Chrome or to another browser, you realize how much of a real tug of war there is on every page load between content and advertising and a mix of those things in a lot of cases. And so when you block all these things by default, you basically clear that deck out, you get the content that's supposed to load, and then everything else that doesn't load. And that, so you save, loading time, you save network requests that go out, so your data's not leaking. You're also saving download, because all those scripts aren't downloading right to the page. So there's a lot of resource savings that happens when you do that, but it also protects your privacy, which is, the real core value there.
Right. And we see, at least anecdotally, I've seen a lot of friends, family, people in the tech and media community making the switch to Brave because of all the benefits that you kind of just outlined. But I'd imagine that getting the average consumer to switch their browser is a very difficult task, because it's almost like it's somewhat relatable to trying to get an iPhone user to buy an Android phone the next time they go out to buy a phone. So what is kind of the biggest challenge in that kind of wave of adoption, to move from the early adopters to kind of mainstream, and getting the mainstream to make the switch?
Yeah, it's a great question. Like, and the analogy I kind of like to use is, or the example is kind of like buying a car, right? Like, you don't really, if you have a car that you like, you don't really think about buying another car unless there's something really cool that comes out that has a lot of advantages, or maybe your status changes or whatever, or there's something that goes wrong with the car that you have. So, browsers are very much like that. It's a thing that you use a lot that you don't necessarily think about a lot. And so the value props have got to be good in order to get people in. And I think, we have this lead users, these really hardcore users up front that were willing to kind of deal with a lot of these issues around sites breaking, because sometimes these ad calls are intertwined with functional pieces in the page, and you get these kind of false positives or this breakage in the page. So anyway, like, what it comes down to is, like, you get those lead users on, and then that you got to go out to the next ring of users, right? And so it's all about making sure that you don't break the web, that things not only load fast but don't break, because if you're talking about behavioral changes, right? Like, so even if you switch browsers, those behavioral patterns are pretty much going to stay the same, because it's just a routine. And so if you break things that are in that routine, people exit. You really got to make sure that you're keeping the web functional while doing what you're trying to do at that fundamental level. And then also bringing additional value to users, right? So when we initially came out with Brave, it was very much like, okay, we have these ideas and these proofs of concept for things that we want to do. Then we brought out the advertising platform, and now it's this game of, like, we're at like 29 million monthly active users. We just announced that today. You get to these bigger audiences, and it's all about, okay, if we really want to compete here, not only do we have to deliver privacy, but it has to be convenient. It has to have things that, are really beneficial to users that they aren't getting elsewhere. And part of what we're doing at the advertising side is bringing that, but then you can earn from viewing ads, but then what are you going to do next, right? Like, how can you use that and pay that forward? So there's a lot of things around competing against convenience, because all these big companies in tech are, especially with COVID now, it's like touchless payments, touchless everything. You're kind of trying to balance out delivering strong privacy with living in this kind of touchless commerce world, where there are still major problems around kind of figuring out that last mile of, is somebody going to purchase something, but at the same time it's like we want to make a purchase without touching anything. So there's a lot of factors to balance here, but mainly it comes down to making something that's convenient and easy and brings some added value to the user that they're not getting elsewhere.
Yeah, and I'd imagine that one of the best ways to motivate people to make the switch is probably just to list out all of the ways that a Google Chrome is tracking them. this is a very long list, unfortunately, but would you mind maybe mentioning just some of the types of data that Google Chrome tracks a user on a regular basis?
Yeah, I mean, it's really kind of happens at different levels, right? Like, and this happened with Chrome in 2018. They introduced a feature where the first time you sign into a Google service, so you could be going into your Gmail account in Chrome, the browser, the Google will actually authenticate you into the browser with your login that you're using for your Gmail, which was a very kind of controversial thing when they did that, and because they did that in Chrome, you see companies like Microsoft with Edge coming out where they're taking it to the next level, where they're using that same ID that you're logging into your operating system with the first time you run Edge to actually log you into the browser that time as well. So the game's different now. But aside from, Google tracking at the advertising level, aside from the fact that Google Analytics is everywhere on the web, and then you have these scenarios with AMP and these other efforts that Google is making to basically cache the web to their servers. You have all of that happening, but even at the browser level, you have Google tracking. And then even when there's a whole list of these things, we actually have it in the github.com/Brave in the Brave browser wiki. It's a long list of areas where we deviate from Chrome with our Chromium browser, and things like, making sure that everything that has to call back to Google is either proxied or removed, right? And there's a lot of these things. And the thing that people don't really realize is, people will throw out these, pseudonymous, we're protecting, but we're collecting, but still, we're making it honest. But the reality is you only need a certain amount of bits to really track somebody, and enough calls will do it. And so Google is so big, and they're so intertwined with everything that, you really, there are so many areas where Google does track you that it's just basically almost every level. And it's not all malicious necessarily, but and Google doesn't position it that way either. Like they're saying, trust us as your kind of data warehouse, basically. But really, it's everything. Like it's just massive amount of data that's going out, and that's not counting if you have an Android phone, and then they're tied to your carrier, they're tied to everything, right? Like everything is happening through your device, and you can pair that with your desktop computer, and if you have Google Sync running, everything's going to Google basically. So and Google will say things like, well, we don't use all of that for targeting advertising. And I think that the question, to that is like, it's really with the way that these services work together and interoperate, it's really hard to tell like what's being used for what. And advertising is very much a black box. It's not open. It's not transparent. That was one of the interesting things about coming to Brave, was that we had a lot of engineers that worked with Chromium engineers and Chrome engineers. And, a lot of these things are open source, but I was used to working with Google on the advertising side, which is very much a black box, where you've got, a rep that rotates out every 4 to 6 months. So just when they get on the hang of everything, then they got to retrain somebody else. So they're very complex. It's not called big tech for just because it's a snazzy thing. It's big tech. Like there is a lot of moving parts of it. So yeah. The more you can limit that, the better as far as your privacy goes.
Yeah, and another way that you guys have differentiated yourselves from Google and the other web browsers is what you're doing with this basic attention token. So let's dive into this now. First, bot is kind of what it's referred to. And as somebody who's traveled to Thailand, I thought that was really cute. Because for those of you that don't know, that's the name of the currency they use in Thailand, is the bot, spelt a little differently. But the basic attention token, so this basically works in a way that content creators or people who own a website can go ahead and verify through Brave that they are the owners of that website, and then immediately begin earning these bot rewards from people who use the Brave browser that are spending time on their sites. So I have a few questions in this direction. The first is, you're doing this through a cryptocurrency called bot. Why does it have to be, or why does it help to be a cryptocurrency? Why couldn't you just pay people out in their local fiat currency, for example?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things with this. With the goal of what we're trying to do here is to have, a transparent blockchain where you can track events and make sure that things are happening in a way that removes the central authority and has this kind of public source of truth. So there's that element of it too, but also, it's more than advertising, right? Like you're talking about an attention economy, and what we really are trying to do with that is have a unit of account for attention. And that's essentially what our token is. And so you could use Bitcoin, you could use other things. You're dealing with, having, interoperability issues. And we actually used Bitcoin when we first started doing this. But, the mining fees went up, and all of a sudden this, $5 amount you want to put in your wallet cost $9, and it was just a tough sell. So there's a couple of reasons why we do this. Aside from that, we were able to create a growth pool of tokens when we did our token sale, which basically let us use it to for the first year or so. We were just giving people $5 a month in BAT as grants so that they could pay it forward to content creators, so that those content creators could see, hey, here's a new stream of revenue coming in. It's not massive, but it's something new. And so going at these things, looking at the web and the attention economy from a global context, having a unified token to deal with that is kind of the way to go. And, we were really early with ours, and we were one of the only projects out there that actually had a functional product when we did our token sale, which really stood us apart, aside from Brendan, who not only did he do Firefox, but he also created JavaScript. So it's like, this is all just, kind of like this, okay, if we have a second chance to get this right, how can we get this right? And using that, cryptocurrency and utility token approach, it unlocks a lot of other things too. Like when we did our token sale, decentralized finance was not a thing yet. And watching that over the past year and just seeing how people are using BAT with that has been interesting. And you've got things like NFTs and all these new areas that are offshooting from crypto. It's like really like we want to kind of get familiar with all of them. And as a browser, you want to make sure that people can use those things in there. So yeah, I mean, the token we get that question a lot, but a lot of it kind of comes down to limiting complexity, but also bringing transparency that the blockchain can bring to the attention economy.
Right. And I know you guys are doing some really interesting things with tipping through the browser or on the browser level with the bot, like being able to even tip directly to people on Twitter. So you're integrating with other platforms, Twitter being an obvious first place to go. But to dive a little bit deeper into what's going on with the bot, if I, as a user, am looking at a website and the Brave browser is blocking ads, and so I'm not seeing ads on this website, and then the creator of the website is earning bot, where is the money coming from? Is it somehow still coming from advertisers? Is Brave paying out the content creators? How does that work?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So the way that we've designed the system is basically so that advertisers are kind of the first piece. So advertisers put campaigns into the system that use BAT, and so their campaigns they can spend in USD or crypto, but ultimately it gets into the system as BAT, right? So users are earning these tokens as they're browsing, and they see up to 5 ads an hour. Each ad they get 70% of the revenue that comes from the ad goes straight to them, and then they can use those tokens to support content creators. And in Brave, our ad system is opt-in. So a user opts in to rewards and it basically activates BAT in the browser. So that's when you can get ads, but in turn, you also get auto contributions turned on. So it's kind of like this autopilot method of as you browse, the browser locally knows where you're going, where you're spending your time. And then at the end of the month, it'll take, proportionately distribute your tokens that you earn to those content creators that are verified. And if they're not verified, you can pledge those tokens to creators. And then when they do verify, the browser will keep trying to send it to them. But when they do verify, it'll eventually go out. And if it's within 180 days, I think it's 180 days, it'll keep trying until it follows through, or it'll go back into your wallet. So these things, they're designed in a way that we integrated publisher features first before we did advertising, because we wanted publishers to know this is not something where we are just trying to block your revenue and not give you anything. We were very conscious of making sure that we built the pipelines in there so that we can make sure that publishers are getting a better deal, because the publishers, they're seeing diminishing returns from advertising as it is now. There's a lot of intermediaries between, that advertiser and your end user that are taking a piece across the pie. And so we figured, okay, we'll bring advertising, we'll have this contribution model at first, and then when ads come on, we'll bring whatever format we can bring that'll bring the best value and revenue, and then we'll bring in, as we scale, bring in additional things like publisher ads that will give publishers a 70% revenue share, and a user will get 15 and Brave will get 15. So you could see this as a new way to kind of like remove a lot of that middle and that blob of like media lumiscape that's in between, that brand and that user and that publisher, and creating a more, a more connected, disintermediated flow where the user is actually getting something. And I think that's the key thing that's been missing, is that users, advertisers claim that you will get, we're giving you relevant things and you get a free web, but really not so much. These companies are tracking you everywhere you go, and offline too, right? And so there's a lot that you're giving up for that, and users aren't getting much except for a slower experience and unknown parties taking their data, knowing what they're doing, et cetera. So yeah, that's what we're trying to do here, is kind of instill a more fair, equal model that gives everybody that is really contributing to the equation, a little bit more than what they're getting otherwise.
Okay, great. And let me just play devil's advocate for one
Sure.
second and say, okay, but you started off saying that Brave is great because you're not tracking me, but you're also saying that you have to track me so that you can give out rewards based on where I'm spending my time and attention. So how does that work?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's really, if you think about how people are tracked right now, outside of our Brave's ecosystem, right? Like you go to a page, all these calls take your data from your device to the cloud. That's the big difference there, right? With Brave, what we're doing is introducing models that use the browser level data that's local on your device. So just think about it in the way that you have browsing history that's specific to you and your cache, all of that data that's on your device. Instead of having systems that work from the cloud, we built them to work directly in the browser. So it's like putting a really smart ad server directly onto your device. And then it's like putting, a really smart ledger directly onto your device. And we have events that fire off, but we do it in an anonymous way that uses cryptographic proofs that can basically account for events that happen with math, and then not attach that to a specific user, and then can aggregate them all. So that, all this data collection that happens by these third parties, it's not like an advertiser or a publisher is saying, I want to target Chase. I want to target Chase directly because there's just something about him that I really want to get at, or Luke for that matter, right? Like they're looking at a graph that has a line that goes up or down, right? And all this, the reason why this stuff's happening is because that's the web that we've known. Nobody's introduced anything new because there hasn't been any incentive to do that, because there's so much money in data collection. So, the way that we're approaching this is like, yes, there is data, but it doesn't leave your device. That's the key difference there. We can compute from the edge, from your device, because the technology is there to do it. And we're the first to really bring these principles to market in a large way that we have.
Yeah, great. And obviously, as the privacy-focused browser that you are, it's very important which search engine you choose to work with in the early days. Brave has chosen to go with DuckDuckGo. We've seen Firefox have this long relationship with Google search, and I believe Microsoft products probably use Bing as their search engine, just a natural coordination there. So I saw on your platform's website that you're working on your own search engine now. So it seems like DuckDuckGo might be getting kicked to the curb soon, which is probably going to be a big hit to them. But what is it that you feel makes you feel that you need to have your own search engine, and what should we expect out of that search engine?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, first off, we're not kicking anybody to the curb. I think, the thing, we have partnered with DuckDuckGo. They were our first big search engine partner. And, Google is still kind of a default in a lot of countries because people are used to Google. And one of the things that happened at Firefox was that they made a search engine deal where they forced a different default on people, and it really impacted, the retention rates, et cetera. So you don't want to disrupt. It's like what we were talking about earlier. You don't want to disrupt regular behaviors. And, if people are searching, there's a lot of people get confused a lot between search engines and browsers. People mix those things up quite often. And so, you know, like we would talk to people and people be, oh yeah, you're using that, you work for that search engine. It's like, no, we were a browser, you know? And so, but really, when you look at search engines, even though, I mean, people talk about advertising being kind of a duopoly. The search engine space is very, very much like that. If you start to look under the hood with a lot of search engines, a lot of them are either, you know, Google or Bing with a different label on it. And maybe they have some different properties, but really they're going to those two indexes, and the advertising is coming from a small handful of companies. And so, you know, there's the fact that, you know, there is no real independent player out there from big tech. That's one of the reasons why we're doing this, because one, we think we can, you know, we brought on this company, we acquired this company, Tailcat, that really sharp group out of Europe. They have been working on really good privacy preserving search engine models, and they've done that with their own index, which to have the independence is key, right? Like you want to make sure that, you know, if you're going to go to market with something that's a privacy product, that you are not being influenced by commercial interests to compromise on those privacy promises. And Brave is very much a privacy first, but also a user first company. And, you know, to some people would say that's to a fault. Like, who in their right mind would give 70% of their advertising revenue back to the users? Well, a user first company would, because we're trying to create a different paradigm and a shift and a different dynamic. So with search engine, like, you know, if you think about it, like Brave went to market as a browser, but really, if you look at what we're doing, it is looking much more like almost like a privacy super app model, where you have these different services to where, okay, you know, you talk about independent search, you've got a browser. Last July, we came out with a VPN product for iOS that we're bringing to other operating systems. And April of last year, we introduced Brave together. It's kind of a Zoom competitor that is private and secure, and, you know, avoids the Zoom bombing thing. But you can also make calls directly from the browser. So like you can think about these things kind of forming up as almost like this easy way to kind of unplug from Google and move over to a new platform that cares about you, puts your priorities first, and has your interests kind of at heart. So that's kind of, you know, where we're going, and then adding the crypto element on top of all of that and bringing the crypto to the masses. You know, we have this opportunity here to basically be that bridge where you've got a usable product that millions of people can use, and then also we're introducing this crypto world to them in a way that is easy to digest and is easy to use and doesn't require having to go, you know, eye glaze over what's a blockchain and all of these things that are really complicated. So yeah, that's kind of the value we're bringing here, and long-term kind of like approach that we have.
Cool. And maybe you're already doing this, but I'd imagine that with the bot, you could create certain bounties for, say, you want to work on this new search engine. You could create possibly tickets and say, okay, create this open source code base for this new search engine, and there's a bounty attached to it if we confirm that you submitted good code, and you can earn X amount of bot, and maybe actually have the open source community help you guys build this way. Is that something that you guys are already doing or thinking about?
Yeah, at a certain level we are. So you mentioned the Twitter tipping functionality that we built in there. So a user, it started off with web domains. If you had a web domain, you could come verify that domain and be a verified publisher. Well, then we kind of pivoted towards creators. So if you have a YouTube account, a Twitter account, Twitch account, Vimeo, and also I know I'm missing some there, but Reddit and also GitHub. So we built inline tipping into GitHub. So if you go and you post an issue, or you do a pull request, or most of the functional features in GitHub in Brave have a tipping icon next to them. And the whole reason for that was exactly what you're getting at. It's like this big thing around, you know, all these companies, open source code powers a lot of the web, and especially it's getting bigger and bigger in the commercial area. But you've got a lot of projects that have, you know, dependencies and maintainers that are doing this, and maintaining open source code is like, you're not making, you know, Silicon Valley wages doing that type of thing. And so building this functional tipping in was a way that we could use the bat to basically, you know, reward contributors for code. And that's the way that we kind of approach it. It's a utility. It's not just for one thing. It could be for anything in the browser where we can apply this this approach. So yeah, GitHub was a big one where we started to introduce that, and we started just using it within a company at first, but then we started sharing it with people that were, you know, hey, we've got this here. And on Reddit, we started seeing like different subreddits starting where, if you were verified, you could come in and use this thing. And it's really cool to kind of watch. That's the beautiful part about the web is that, people, it's decentralized. People can go you give them the tools and then they or ingredients, they start to cook different meals. It's really kind of cool to see.
Yeah. Great. And one of the things we care about a lot at Credder is kind of this decentralized reputations of news media, both on the article, author, and outlet level. We're trying to connect and enable news consumers all around the world to work together to kind of sift through what is trustworthy content and what is maybe not worth your time. I think about the browser as the holy grail opportunity of connecting online news consumers in real time and letting them work together in this way. We see a lot of different solutions in the space, whether it be fact checkers or centralized authorities who say this is good, this is bad. Have you guys at Brave thought about possibly helping tackle this issue of content credibility by kind of creating a tool where, or maybe partnering with a platform that exists to give your users the ability to work together to kind of critique content and create these scores?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we're approaching it. I mean, there's a balance here, right? We're a more principled browser than a lot of other browsers are, but the reality is everybody uses the web too. And, with the way that these, content moderation's been done on these big platforms, it gets pretty political pretty fast. And, anytime you go too hard in one direction or another, you're going to alienate a huge part of your user base. And so there's a balance there. But I think with regard to the specific question, any extension that you can use in Chrome, you can use in Brave. And I think that's a really cool thing about it is that a lot of these companies that are bringing these services to market are doing them in extensions. And, the cool thing about being a browser is that if there's an extension that is really taking off or is kind of becoming the lead, and there is a fit for us to natively integrate that, we will. And so I think it's still early in this space with determining what these systems look like. But I think, we definitely are looking at them and we're talking to a lot of these projects, and we're trying to make it as easy for them to work in Brave as possible. I think as it progresses and gets a little bit more, foundation around it, you'll start to see, okay, this is one or two or three different models that are being used. Maybe there are ways that we can, if we can't do it directly, we'll make it so it's easy to plug right in. So I would say, yeah, anything's possible. But right now it's kind of not being a referee as much of it, just putting a level playing field out there for these services to compete and for, because it is kind of messy right now. So much content comes through so few players that it's okay, people make these decisions and all of a sudden you've got 3 or 4 different platforms removing, creators or even entire platforms getting removed, right? So it's pretty early in this space, but we just want to make it accessible for people to use the web. And as long as they're not, promoting violence or, anything that, definitely crosses a red line, we let people earn.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I think in most cases, we should try to let content stay up. And one of the ways you can do that is by showing a score that the kind of a decentralized score that other users have kind of labeled that content as. So you can say, just like with Rotten Tomatoes, for example, if you go to RottenTomatoes.com, there are bad movies, really bad movies. Paul Blart Mall Cop is on Rotten Tomatoes, but it's there and it's rated, so you can know that it's maybe not worth your time. So I'm glad to hear that you guys are at least open to those types of ideas. I would be remiss not to talk a little bit about NFTs just because it would allow me to put the word NFT in the thumbnail somewhere. That's kind of the level we're at with this craze right now. I'm not going to ask you the question that you see on CNBC, which is isn't this a bubble? Isn't this crazy? Personally, I think it's just the natural evolution of the art industry, and art has always been in some ways a store of value. But I'm curious how the Brave browser is interacting with NFTs. Is it still way too early and you guys are still kind of crafting a strategy? How's that going to play out?
Yeah, I think like stepping back and looking at what an NFT is, right? Like there's so much focus right now on the art side of it and the art creation, NFT artists, the collectible side of it. But really, what's really interesting to me is the fact that you can use NFTs for access control. So things like unlocking publisher content. There's actually a project called Unlock that was maybe a little too early to the space that was doing that. They actually had a pilot with Forbes with their cryptocurrency section of their site where you could buy an NFT for access for content. So I think, the cool thing about NFTs is you can use them to access digital content, but then you could also generate a QR code and use that in real life where it's redeemable. So there's a lot of room for NFTs in Brave. I think if you think about an attention tokens that are fungible and non-fungible tokens that have, there's a natural pairing there. And I think whether it's access control, whether it's collectibles, and we've done collaborations with gaming partners, and we've done our own NFT sales where we meme competitions with the community, or a collectible with a gaming company that these things sell out very quickly. There's definitely a lot of hype around it, but I think the really most interesting stuff from a browser perspective is what kinds of experiences could you create with NFTs? And I think we're just starting to scratch that surface, and we're looking at there's these level 2 NFTs which solve a lot of the concerns and problems around like transaction fees, but also there's a lot of environmental concerns around proof of work models, right? Like in these level 2 schemes and this proof of stake stuff that's happening with Ethereum is going to remedy a lot of that. I mean, you're never going to like zero it all out and tell everybody's using solar or something, but like these problems that are getting focused on right now or highlighted by a lot of the people that are concerned, which I can totally relate with that, are temporary problems. I think if you look at the evolution of the light bulb, the tungsten bulb, didn't start from day one having this long shelf life. Like bulbs lasted very short times. It iterated, got to a point where it's now mass marketed, right? It's a very similar thing happening in the blockchain space right now. I think the first couple of years, it was, the last 2 or 3 years, a lot of it was like hype, build, some people building, a lot of people hyping, bubble come, bubble go. But the companies that have stuck around with it and are really actually building and are focusing on utility are the ones that are doing the best right now, in the space, whether they have something out or they have something coming out soon. So I think NFTs are the amount of attention they're getting is just, it's an awesome time for it, because you've got a lot of institutional interest in blockchain technology now, and in Bitcoin and Ethereum, et cetera. But also, people relate with these things, right? Like people understand artwork, people understand Beanie Babies, people understand, redeemable things, like, and you can turn an NFT into a redeemable object, right? So obviously, like having an advertising platform that focuses on privacy, pairing that with NFTs, like there's a lot of potential there, right? Like you could follow through in an action from a campaign and redeem an NFT, and then take that to Taco Bell or McDonald's or whatever. Your whole monopoly board could be NFTs, right? Like, so there's a lot of things where, we're very much looking into the space. We're experimenting in it. We're not having a single path that we're doing, but we're more like seeing what are the best use cases that we could do and pick the ones and that of interest that you can kind of integrate, but also play with folks that are into crypto, because it's like a lot of our users are super into cryptocurrency. So it's like, it's a balanced approach, but we're very much into it.
Yeah, and you're right to call out that NFTs is much bigger than just art. Obviously, the hype, a lot of it right now is around kind of creating these non-fungible tokens for digital art. But as you mentioned, NFTs can apply to other types of collectibles or things that you would prove ownership of. For example, your house, the deed of your house could be an NFT. Is there some type of thing that you think is ultimately going to become an NFT that would surprise me or listeners, something that's totally out of left field?
I don't know. I mean, like one of those things that really kind of caught me off guard was looking at blockchain gaming. So we started last fall to do a lot of blockchain gaming partnerships, and they were just like the best mixed bag of interesting things happening in crypto under one umbrella, because they're using NFTs for land deeds for games. So imagine you're playing SimCity and you could actually like own the town hall and take it to another version of SimCity. Like that's what really cool, because if you look at gaming, you play a game, they come out with a new game, you got to start from zero. But with NFTs, you can actually have ownership of something that also happens to increase in value and play with that in the game. So that's something where I feel like it's not known in the gaming industry yet. The gaming companies are trying to integrate it. I think that's going to blow up big. Like, I think that's going to be really interesting because this whole value, like I was a teenager. I bought video games. They were expensive then. They're expensive now. Like, if there's a way that you could extend that value into other, games and have it be less of a price gouging exercise, I think that's cool. Like, I think a lot of the redemption cases are really interesting, right? You could have a scenario where, there's a service we provide, we can generate an NFT. As long as you own that NFT, it doesn't matter what device you're on, you can access that service, right? And it kind of is a different way of approaching a problem. And also you can do it without having to fork over a lot of your own personal data in exchange. So there's ways that we're looking at this, from a privacy level, but also from a utility level. And I think that that's really the untapped piece here. I think the sky's the limit with this stuff. It'll come down to okay, infrastructure needs work. A lot of these things are kind of, and that's typical with any early technology. But all you need are a couple good players to come in and build something rock solid. And we're known for doing that at Brave. So I think that it's a matter of time before the opportunity for a browser to unlock these potential with NFTs is just huge. And so you'll see us do that in DeFi too, for that matter.
That's really cool what you just said about how NFTs can help make gaming more affordable, because it's almost like we've come full circle, because at the beginning of this talk, we were talking about how advertising can make certain things more affordable for consumers. And video games have steered very clear of having advertisements inside of video games naturally. But it is very interesting to think that if you're playing FIFA, maybe you can own Messi's home Barcelona jersey, for example, in the game, and that's a way of subsidizing the cost of the game for consumers.
Right.
Very cool.
Right. Yeah. And it's just kind of neat to be able to actually own this stuff. You spend so much time in a game, and you could use one of the things. So we partnered with Gala Games, and Gala Games co-founder, CEO, was the co-founder of Zynga, and they brought Farmville to Facebook, right? And so he's just saw this potential really early and was like, this is just going to be huge. I mean, because you can actually have the value, but that value can also appreciate with time. So it's like there's this neat value with crypto where, okay, yeah, we see this, like the value of BAT recently went up quite a bit. And you see people that, oh, well, maybe I was just collecting these tokens for 4 or 5 months. It didn't really seem, whatever. And then all of a sudden they look at their wallet one day and they're like, whoa, okay, this is like a decent amount of money now. If I'm a publisher, right? One tip a couple of months ago was like 20 cents, right? Like now it's like over $1. Like a lot of publishers offer promotions for $1, right? So you could see this becoming like, as Brave scales and as we get a bigger audience and as the value back goes up, with that audience, which is designed to do, like we only made one BAT, we issued BAT once, and there's a fixed max supply of it. So as Brave's user base grows and as advertisers advertise to that space, it gets more and more fractional. So, what should happen over time is that more and more publishers start to take notice and want to get involved with this because, it comes to a certain point where it's like, I should get involved with this, right? Like, and even for an advertiser, like this is a really interesting part about this. So say you're an advertiser, you're planning your media by 3 or 4 months out in advance. Well, what if we have a platform where, hey, you could basically like prepay for that now. And let's say we have some DeFi, stuff in the background that actually could end up paying down the cost of your ad campaign just by fact of you prepaying, right? Like there's other applications for this too, with like users and with creators, but we're so early and yet it's functional. Like we have a reporter with Gemini. They have a crypto card that they have a wait list for, but basically any Visa purchase you make, you get 3% crypto back, which passive advertising, earning BAT from advertising, earning crypto from just doing normal stuff that you do. Like this is the way that you get millions and millions of people into this because there's just no cognitive load where you gotta just the complexity of this technology is really mind numbing sometimes, but like so is email when you go under the hood and everybody uses it, right? So it's like we just have to get it to the point where people aren't even thinking about it. It's just part of their everyday life. And one of the things we introduced to our roadmap is this unified wallet, and that's exactly what we're trying to do with that. Is demystify it by not putting it in isolation as like the crypto thing. Like just make it one of your payment options and do your thing.
That's great. Before we get to the last 2 questions that I ask every guest that comes on the podcast, I want to say that Credder has actually claimed its account so we've been collecting bot for I think the last year now.
Nice.
But why don't you go ahead and tell publishers or content creators who are listening how they could go about claiming their account?
Yeah. So it's easy. You go to creators.brave.com. We have a process that you go through where you basically put a file in your web directory, or you change your text record, or if it's YouTube, you just OAuth your YouTube account. And then we have a partner, Uphold, and a couple other partners we brought on where you sign up with them so that they can handle the payment flow. So if you're a publisher, we've designed this to work in a way that you don't even have to touch crypto if you don't want to. It can just go to cash and go to cash to your bank account. And then once you're there, it's up to you. You can promote Brave to your audience, and as your Brave audience grows, so your contributions. There's also probably a good amount of people that are already viewing your content from Brave, and so you might find that there's just a income stream that grows as Brave grows with your audience. And so that's the easiest way to get started. And then on top of that, we've got our ad platform, and we have some case studies that we're going to be coming out with very soon that are very creator focused on ways that we can help promote content. We did this with Dow Jones. We're doing this with a bunch of small and mid-tail creators to kind of show people look, when you have an advertising ecosystem where people are opting in, and the only people that see ads are the people that really want to see ads, it's a different experience. It's a different level of engagement. It's people that are really into whatever we're putting in front of them. And so we have some really interesting data coming out around some creators where we were able to really significantly grow their audience through our ad platform. And so you can almost think of this, okay, I can earn that through the ecosystem and then pay that back forward to the advertising part to grow my audience with it. And then there's a secondary effect where, my RPMs on YouTube are growing with my audience. Okay, so I'm making more money outside of Brave, and I'm making money inside of Brave from this audience that's just automatically contributing. So creators.brave.com is a place to go. And I'm on Twitter. I'm Luke Mulks on Twitter. You could hit me up if you have any questions, or go to the website or whatever, but we're all very open and accessible at the company too. So yeah, feel free to drop me a line.
I can attest to you guys being open because I just reached out for a podcast and here you are. So it's true. And I can also say that there's no reason not to go ahead and claim your account. You literally don't have to do anything else after that, and you would start earning these bot rewards. And as you called out earlier, they are designed to appreciate over time. So the sooner you verify and then forget about it, the better. Obviously, you would prefer that they don't forget about it and promote it. But if you do it and forget about it, the sooner you do that, the better. All right. So the last two questions I have for you here today, Luke. This first one isn't going to come as a surprise. We've kind of already mentioned it, but it tends to throw off other guests that I have that are more journalists or media focused. But that is Bitcoin. Are you a believer or not so much?
I'm a believer. I mean, I started with Bitcoin in 2014, 2015-ish. I think it's really kind of led the way in everything that we've been talking about here. Without Bitcoin, we wouldn't have had it. And I think there's still things go tribal as things get bigger, and there's this maximalist component of Bitcoin that I just don't understand. But fine, I think that the best approach is to just have an open mind and look at what the best things are that each of these different projects are bringing to market, because ultimately that cream rises at the top and the winner's there. But I think, what Bitcoin's been able to do, what it's continuing to do, is to show, if you decentralize and you have a transparent blockchain for these things, you eliminate a lot of the BS that people have to deal with in the real world. And you can really empower people to, have more control over their destiny. And I think that's one of the things we're trying to do at Brave too, in multiple aspects around technology.
Cool. Let's stay on that for just another second. So with Bitcoin, we've heard a lot of mainstream arguments against Bitcoin over the last 10 years or so. It started with things like, it's being used to fund terrorism and drugs and these types of things, which the response from the Bitcoin community was really quickly, and so is the dollar, and so is the other currency. So that argument has kind of started to disappear. But the more recent argument is this issue that you brought up earlier, which is kind of the energy toll of a proof of work type of protocol. You mentioned that you think it's going to become more and more efficient over time. I personally believe that too, because I think there's a financial incentive for Bitcoin mining to move to renewable, sustainable energy sources. But can you maybe touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, so with Bitcoin, very proof of work oriented, and Ethereum is too, where you basically have, all these computers are basically, just crunching the numbers to solve these problems, right? And what Ethereum's doing is they're starting to move to Ethereum 2, which is a proof of stake, consensus model, which instead of having it based off of doing computational problems, you have stakeholders and bat, and if they can all basically align in a similar way to proof of work, but using staking instead of computational power, you're going to have, it's more of a beacon instead of a machine grinding it out, right? Like, and so, I think if you look at how proof of stake is developing and the potential to grow that out, because you've got incentives there, and right now they're kind of in an intermediary step where they've launched the first version of this, and it has more ETH in it than I think anybody would have imagined at this point, because you can take 32 ETH and start to participate with this, but you can actually take lesser now. So there's services that do that, but point being, you have this path with proof of stake. You also have better adoption of renewable energy sources outside of cryptocurrency, right? Like, Tesla's a great example, and Solar City, all this stuff they're doing. These two things are going to make things more efficient over time. Bitcoin people might get stuck in proof of work, which might happen. Like, I don't know. Like, every time I try to figure out Bitcoin people at their core, it's either really great or it's something I totally don't understand, because, there's this tribal element like I was talking about earlier. But, I think that generally technology tends to innovate and become more efficient over time. I think that that's going to happen here. I think that, blockchain, everybody knows about it. Everybody that's dealing with it knows too, right? Like the cost. The great thing is that Ethereum is becoming so popular now. The downside of that is all that congestion is making doing transactions on the blockchain so expensive that it's pretty prohibitive in a lot of cases. And so there is a lot of motivation towards moving to more efficient ways of doing this. And I think this summer you're going to see the start of that. Ethereum changing the way that their transaction fees work in a way that is going to help make things, less painful on that front. So these things, it's technology. Technology is just going to work to get more efficient over time. I have never worked in a space, and I've worked in a lot of different tech areas in my career, never worked in a space where you have this much just raw, brilliant talent focused on this many hard problems, and are working with there's a lot of bad, actors everywhere, but there are people genuinely putting their life into solving these problems because the benefits are so huge. It can really kind of level up society in a lot of ways. And I think, when you look at how individual consumers have paid the price of everything around them consolidating and getting larger, when you look at how you can empower those people, doing it with blockchain technologies, open source, transparent nature of these things is the best way to do it. And like sunlight's the best disinfectant, and models, but even governments are looking at this stuff, right? Like, if you can get rid of fraud, waste, and abuse, why would you want to go to a model where that is okay? I mean, I think the funny thing about this stuff is people are just now figuring out how horrible the banking system works, right? Like, oh, I want to go make a transaction outside of my country. It's going to take days. What? Like, this does not make sense. Like, even as much as we gripe about blockchain timing for transactions, even on our worst day, it's better than what these, existing wiring is having to require all these banks to do, which I think is the reason why, like, the U.S. banking regulators, OCC, in January, made it okay for banks to begin validating for, Ethereum-based stablecoins. Like, I think there is just a lot of use, a lot of function, and a lot of efficiency here, and it's just going to get better and better over time.
Yeah, and a lot of people from the outside looking in say, wow, this is a ridiculous, undeserved amount of capital in this space. But I think when you look at the amount of human capital that has moved to this space, I think it makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So last question for you here is, are we living in a simulation?
It depends on what day you're asking that question. I mean, like, yeah, like, define the scope of the simulation, maybe. I mean, yeah, like, I think we live in the unknown a lot of the time, and it's funny because on some levels, we feel like we're learning so much and there's so much technology, and then in other levels, it's like we're still monkeys in a lot of ways in some, aspects, and one of the things with COVID, I got in this real rabbit hole with like, okay, well, when was the last time something like this happened? And it's like, you look at like Spanish flu, and there was like contingents of anti-maskers in, the early 1900s. And there were people getting tickets for not wearing masks. And it's literally saw a picture from an old newspaper where somebody said a shirt that said, wear a mask. And I'm like, nothing is different. Like we can make a vaccine a hell of a lot faster now, which is amazing. And there's some really amazing benefits, but it does feel like, gosh, like the game is updating fast in some areas and not. And yeah, I don't know, like if I am in a simulation, I'm in a simulation with dependencies because I've got a couple great kids that I have to take care of. So, Viva simulation in some respects, but it's going to be one of those questions where you're not going to know until you're too late to do anything about it, I think.
I think that's all right. Yeah. Thank you, Luke. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. This was a great conversation. It's great for us to introduce some of our listeners to kind of all the innovation going on in the advertising world and the cryptocurrency and decentralized finance. I'd love to invite you back on in the future, maybe when the search engine comes out, if you can come back on to talk about that. But thank you so much for coming on, and best of luck to all of you at the Brave team.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Luke.
All right.